chapter 5.
I read the book, I remember, and I read it then.
You read
My
it?
English not been so good. I didn't really, I liked it a lot.
Well, it's reasonably likable. It seems simplistic now, but it's probably doesn't matter. The Mysticism and Theology, number 5. Seems we like these words. In the last chapter, he tried to establish a distinction between the mystic who tastes supreme experience and the mystical philosopher who cogitates. I don't know how to pronounce cogitates. Cogitates. What a word. Upon the data so obtained, we have now, however, to take account of the fact that often...
49 or 47?
What?
8.
This is 48. Often the true mystic is also a mystical philosopher, though there are plenty of mystical philosophers who are not and could never be mystics. How does she try to be able to distinguish that? Because it is characteristic of the human self to reflect upon its experience, to use its precepts as material for the construction of a concept. Most mystics have made or accepted a theory of their own adventures. Thus we have a mystical philosophy or theology, the comment of the intellect on the proceedings of spiritual intuition, running side by side with true or empirical mysticism, classifying its data, criticizing it, explaining it, and translating its vision of the supersensual into symbols which are amenable to dialectic. I guess you're bound to get philosophy, aren't you? You just don't have experience and not explain anything. Such a philosophy is most usually founded upon the formal creed which the individual mystic accepts. It is characteristic of him that, in so far as his transcendental activities are healthy, he is generally an acceptor or a rejecter of such creeds. The view which regards the mystic as a spiritual anarchist receives little support from history, which shows us again and again that the great mystics are faithful sons of the great religions. Almost any religious system which fosters unearthly love is potentially a nursery for mystics. And Christianity, Islam, Brahmanism, and Buddhism each receives its most sublime interpretation at their hands. Thus St. Teresa interprets her ecstatic apprehension of the Godhead in strictly Catholic terms. And St. John of the Cross contrives to harmonize his intense transcendentalism with incarnational and sacramental Christianity. Thus Bohemi believed to the last that his explorations of eternity were consistent with the teaching of the Lutheran Church. The Sufis were good Mohammedans. Philo and the Kabbalists were Orthodox Jews. Plotinus even adopted, though with what difficulty, the relics of paganism to his doctrine of the real. Attempts, however, to limit mystical truth.
He doesn't understand the Platonist.
Plotinus? He's a Neoplatonist. Well, does paganism include Plato? The attempts, however, to limit mystical truth, direct apprehension of the divine substance by the formula of any one religion, are as futile as the attempt to identify a precious metal with the dye which converts it into current coin. The dyes which the mystic have used are many. Their peculiarities and excrescences are always interesting
Can
and
you read again yesterday's reading?
yesterday's, sometimes highly significant.
That was really
What do
interesting.
you mean yesterday's reading?
That's the most interesting.
Yesterday's reading? Well, that can be replayed on YouTube. Yesterday's reading is on YouTube. Some, you can just read the book. Yeah, what I'm doing is of no value and useless. A person can just read the book. Why are you doing it? One person says, why are you reading? Is it to educate or to communicate? And my answer was, I don't know. What did I say? I said, not sure. I was going to get into why I do something.
Somebody to read you something, like imagine the children they love to be.
I didn't do the why and the wherefore of things. That's the kid stuff. Some give a far sharper, more coherent impression than others, but the gold from which this diverse coinage is struck is always the same precious metal, always the same beatific vision of a goodness, truth, and beauty, which is one. Hence, its substance must always be distinguished from the accidents under which we perceive it, for this substance has an absolute and not a denominational importance. Nevertheless, if we are to understand the language of the mystics, it is evident that we must know a little of accident as well as of substance. That is to say, of the principal philosophies or religions which they have used in describing their adventures to the world. This being so, before we venture to apply ourselves to the exploration of the theology proper, it will be well to consider the two extreme forms under which both mystics and theologians have been accustomed to conceive divine reality. That is to say, the so-called emanation theory. Do we know all these theories? Theoretical. And emanence theory of the transcendental world. I don't know if she's like in the academic world and the scholastic world of this writer. Emanation and emanence, emanation, emanence are formidable words, apparently, which, though perpetually tossed to and fro by amateurs of religious philosophy, have probably, as they stand, little actuality for practical modern men. They are, however, root ideas for the maker of mystical diagrams and of his best systems are but attempts towards their reconciliation. Since the aim of every mystic is union with God, it is obvious that the vital question in his philosophy must be the place which this God, the absolute of his quest, occupies in the scheme. Briefly, he has been conceived, or better to say, presented by the great mystics under two apparently contradictory modes. It's rather stuffy. Is this stuffy? The opinion which is represented in its most extreme form by the theory of emanations declares his utter transcendence. This view appears early in the history of Greek philosophy. It is developed by Dionysius, by the Kabbalist, and by Dante. Really? Do we know what they're talking about? And is implied in the language of Rulman, oh my goodness, I saw his name today, Rulman Merswin, associated with the Theological Germanica or with the Tower, St. John of the Cross, and many other Christian ecstatics. Do we know what they're talking about? You don't have a PhD in theology. How come? The solar system is an almost perfect symbol of this concept of reality, which finds at once its most rigid and most beautiful expression in Dante's Paradiso. What are they talking about? The absolute Godhead is conceived as removed by a vast distance from the material world of sense. The last or lowest of that system of dependent worlds or states which generated by or emanating from the unity or central sun. Does that say it emanated and become less in spirituality and splendor, greater in multiplicity, the further they recede from their source. That source, the great continence of the Godhead, can never, say the Kabbalist, be recede from its source. That source, the great concerned by man. It is the absolute of the Neoplatonists, the unplumbed abyss of later mysticism, the cloud of unknowing goodness. Wraps it from our sight. Only by its emanations or manifest attributes can we attain knowledge of it. By the outflow of these same manifested attributes and powers, the created universe exists depending, in the last resort, on the latens, Deitas, who is therefore conceived as external to the world which he illuminates and vivifies. What is this saying? He's out there, but you who can get their emanations, which could be like the music of the spheres, right? Or the word, or the light. So it's possible to get the emanations. So we found that we could get emanations from absolute God. I'm reading from, it was stuffy in the beginning, and we read the 5th chapter on Mysticism and Theology.